Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Janet Murray. Hi Janet.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. It's great to have you on the show. Just a little introduction. Janet is a PR coach for experts, businesses, and brands, an author and a podcaster. Her latest book is Your Press Release is Breaking My Heart, a totally unconventional guide to selling your story in the media. Now, we are all super interested in this topic, Janet, and I think we're just going to jump straight in. So I wanted to start with a definition because I think people are confused. What is PR? Why is it different to advertising and other kinds of marketing?
Okay, it's a really good question to start with because when I first started helping people with this, I didn't explain it. And I often used to find out I've been working with someone for a few weeks or a few months and realize that they weren't actually sure what it was. They wanted PR, but they didn't know what it was. So it's a really, really good question. So essentially, PR is free coverage in magazines, newspapers, and on radio and TV. And I think where people get a little bit confused is obviously you can buy adverts in magazines and newspapers, you can buy editorial, you can even buy time on radio and TV, but this is free, credible editorial. So that means that content that journalists want to create because they think it would be really great for their audience rather than content that you're paying them to create.
Wow, that's really interesting. And you used the phrase creditable editorial, which sounds amazing. What are some examples of what is credible editorial? Because we're in this space where there's so many online magazines or whatever. What is credible?
Well, it really depends on what the publication is. So it's what that audience for publication are interested in reading. But, it's essentially every editor will have an idea of what their audience wants to hear about, what they will find stimulating, what they want to talk about with their friends. And increasingly, it's very much driven by what online stuff and whether it's shareable and people are going to talk about it on social media. But for example, I've done quite a bit of editing over the years. I've worked quite a lot on The Guardian. I'll give you an example. I worked on The Guardian Small Business Network. And the kind of things that we're looking for there would be very different than you'd be looking for on a business section somewhere else. So, for example, we'd be looking at really practical how-to articles that are going to help small business owners to really kind of ramp up their business. But then if you look at, say, the business section on The Times, they're probably going to be looking at more kind of financial news. So does that kind of give you an idea?
Yeah, I think so. And like you say, it's going to be different by country. In the UK, The Guardian would be great. Some Americans would be like, yeah, I just don't even care about that, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So then I wanted to, coming to the specifics of authors. So for us, right now, something like BookBug, which is a paid email list, or Facebook ads, which you directly pay for, you pay for them and they are measurable in terms of book sales. Now, and this is kind of my biggest issue around PR, so I think we've got to address it straight up. Why should authors even consider PR when the results are not measurable, are they? Like, I've been on TV and that I can't tell how many people discovered me because I was on this particular TV show. So why should authors do PR?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question and definitely one worth asking. So the way I look at it, there's two ways that PR can help you if you're an author. So the first way is building credibility. So when you go to my website, now at the moment you don't because I've just published a book, so I've got something different on there. But generally when you go to my website, you will see across the top that I've got as featured in The Guardian, Entrepreneur, Huffington Post, BBC, all these kind of credible titles. And that kind of gives you a stamp of approval. And I think for people who want to engage with you, might be reading your books, it might be if you offer other services, they might want to work with you in another way, then it's almost like, well, if the BBC think that they know what they're talking about, or the New York Times think they know what they're talking about, then they must do. Now, we all know that's not necessarily true, but it's like a stamp of approval, basically, that it's kind of credibility. And if you're looking to maybe get speaking gigs, or you're looking to attract, maybe you're indie published and you're looking to maybe attract a traditional publisher, then all of this stuff is going to help because it gives you credibility. And the other thing that's just worth mentioning actually quickly for authors is that often when you put a book proposal out, the first thing that a traditional publisher would want to know is, well, how are you going to publicize this book? Who is your audience? How do we know that you can do this? Well, obviously, as an author, if you've already got this great coverage on some really high profile influential titles, then obviously you're proving that. It's like social proof. The other side of it, it can actually lead to sales. Now this is more complicated because, as you say, it's very difficult to measure the return on investment. But I mean, I think that's true of, apart from like Facebook advertising, or it's true of lots of stuff that you do in your business. People need 8 touch points with you or something. What's the sales research? They need touch points with you, and PR can be one of those touch points. So it may be that they read something that you've had a feature in the New York Times or mention or something, but then they also see you on Twitter, and then I don't know, a Facebook ad pops up or whatever. So it can actually be a cumulative effect of many different touch points, and PR is just one part of it. But for example, when I was doing the book PR I've just indie published a non-fiction book, which is about how to get PR. And when I was doing my PR, I knew that the national press wouldn't be interested in doing a story about my book, which is essentially aimed at, business owners and consultants and authors who want to do their own PR. But I was kind of aware that there were opportunities for me to get coverage. So I wrote an opinion article for PR Week, which is the industry title for the PR industry, because I do also have some people who work in the industry who read my stuff as well. And that particular piece of coverage in PR Week led to an inquiry. We're just firming up the details, but it was actually worth thousands of pounds in terms of consultancy. So I could actually trace that piece back. I've also written a piece for The Guardian about how to write press releases, and that sent me like tons and tons of traffic and tons of potential clients as well. So it can be tricky, but you can measure it at times, and there are ways you can measure your return on investment, but I think it's a little bit like social media. Sometimes it can be clear, and sometimes it's about looking at the overall picture of what you've been doing overall in your PR and marketing, if that kind of makes sense.
Well, there's so much I can come back on that. I think we're going to get into the kind of the targeting as we go through. So I guess let's come back on the success with PR and the multiple touch points, because that's what it seems like for me when I think about getting PR. So I've been on the BBC and all that type of thing, and they found me. So this is the other point. What are the things around being found? Because you mentioned writing an article, for example, and pitching, and we're going to come back to pitching in a minute. But what are the things that authors can do in order to be found by the media when they're looking for people to write a story? So, for example, I got a call, like it was January the 4th or something, a couple of years ago, from Sky News. They wanted a story on career change, on leaving your job, and they Googled and they just found me and called me, and I went on TV like the next morning at 5 a.m. So how can authors, get found without having to pitch? And then we'll come back to pitching.
Well, there's some really simple things that you can do on your social media. Basically, you need to know that journalists are desperate to find experts to comment on stuff, and they are actively looking. So that should be reassuring. So they're often looking on places like Twitter and on LinkedIn. Now, I still practice as a journalist. I've just spent a couple of weeks covering for an editor at The Guardian, so I've been doing this myself. And so basically, they're looking for keywords. They're like happened to you. They were Googling. It might be on Twitter, it might be on LinkedIn. But what I find a lot of people do is they don't sort of do the basics, like, for example, make sure that their Twitter profile really explains what they do in simple terms. They don't have a phone number on there. Now, some people might say, oh, well, I don't want to have my phone number on there. But, journalists don't work 9 to 5 hours. The likelihood is they're going to be looking for somebody to help them at, 9 o'clock at night or 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever. And you could be that person that they come to. But if I've got a big problem with contact forms. That's probably a whole other thing. But if they go to your website and they think, oh, she seems interesting, or he seems interesting, and then they've got to fill out a contact form, that's probably an immediate it just slows them down. But if you've got on your Twitter profile, for example, your phone number, and I've got a real example of this. A lady that I've been working with recently, she's actually a consultant, but she's an author as well, and a BBC journalist for, I think it was Radio 5 Live, they were looking for somebody to talk on her topic of expertise, and because on Twitter, she had her phone number. This is a little tweak. She'd come to one of my webinars and I just suggested this little tweak that she made. She got on 5 Live and also I think on Radio 4 as well. And just that small tweak, just having your phone number on there, and things like on your LinkedIn profile, just making sure it's really clear what you do, which sounds a bit silly, but sometimes people kind of put these kind of like really jargony titles. And actually, you know, if you're a thriller writer, and you know, that's what you need to put. And sometimes I think people can kind of forget their audience.
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned the contact forms, because I agonised over this, and I do have a contact form on the creativepenn.com which goes to my VA, and then she checks that email, you know, a couple of times a week, and which means that I missed a Wired article because it came through too late, and I was actually really annoyed about that. But because I get so much spammy email, I can't not have a form, and it cut down on a whole load of other stuff. So as you're saying that, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, so what shall I do? So is it that I should have a separate press page? And I used to have one, and then I kind of stopped doing it as a separate page. But should authors have a specific page for the press? Like, would a journalist look at that with details on, and what should go on that page?
Yeah, I mean, I find a lot of people sort of wasting time and money creating like media kits. All you need is on your about page, your contact page, that people have the key things. So a phone number. Now, I know this might make you feel a bit uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be your personal phone number. It could just be a answer service or something, but basically where you can get a message to you, quickly. So it could be a phone number. You need a photo, some good quality photos of you. Ideally, selection, not maybe just headshots, but maybe things that tell the story of your business. So they've got a section to choose from, or your book, in fact, depending on what you do. And also some biogs. And I wish that you have different lengths, so you have a 50-word one, a 100-word one, and a 100-word one, and they're the kind of things that journalists are going to be looking for. And also maybe just links to a few other articles that you've been quoted in. When I'm working as an editor, the first thing I do, if someone gets in touch and they want to write something for me, or they want to be featured, the first thing I do is Google them and see what they've done before. And basically, if it's writing, I mean, with an author, you would kind of expect that they can string a sentence together, but there's a big difference between being able to write for the media and writing fiction. And actually sometimes fiction writers can be like the worst people, because they're very elaborate, and they and obviously when you're writing for the media, it's a lot more punchy, and you would use 2 words rather than 20. And I mean, that is the essentials of good writing, but I've noticed that often fiction writers can be a little bit more kind of verbose. And so what you're looking at is, if they've got some examples of their writing and you can see that they can string a sentence together and you're not going to have to edit it too much, then that's going to make you happy. And basically journalists just want to make their life easier, like we all do. They want to do it, they want to find stuff quickly, and they just want to be able to get on with their job.
Yeah, and coming back to the profiles and things, like, it's funny you mentioned LinkedIn. I am shocking with LinkedIn, because I used to use it in my corporate life, so I kind of have this aversion to LinkedIn because it represents my old life, whereas I really just need to update it. But the kind of SEO, the right words to use, search engine optimization around words, like I would, like many people would use the word author or podcaster, for example. So what are some better, what are some examples that would be better than just author on your Twitter profile? Or instead of using something witty, I've noticed that many people use witty words. How exact do they need to be?
I think just being really Ronseal. So for those people who are not from the UK, like, Ronseal is this brand of paint, and there used to be some kind of advert or something, didn't it? It was like Ronseal, what it says on the tin. But I think the more simple you can be and direct, and the less clever you can be, basically, the more helpful it's going to be. So if you are a thriller author or a crime author, that's what you need to say. So if a journalist is looking for a thriller author to comment on something, or a murder mystery writer or whatever, you want to come up first in search. And if you've put some kind of really clever pun or something, they're not going to find you. And the other thing to say as well for LinkedIn is obviously going for radio and TV stuff, have some video on there as well. So radio and TV researchers, they're not looking for perfection, but even just something like this, just see that you're not going to freeze up in front of a camera, and that you're lively, and all that kind of stuff. A little bit of film, a little bit example of your writing. So just, it doesn't have to mean, I have to say, I don't like LinkedIn very much either, and but just making sure that your profile is up to date, and that you're going to come up first in search, basically. And it is just really just thinking really basics. A journalist is not going to be searching for multimedia thriller dystopian blah blah blah, they're going to be looking for, just like a thriller writer or whatever,
Yeah.
or fiction expert or whatever. So to just use those terms, really.
And if you're writing non-fiction around a theme, you would include, those specific words.
Yeah.
Which is, and it's another reason why having multiple, and it is very annoying having multiple brands. So I have JF Penn, which is my fiction, and Joanna Penn, which is my non-fiction, and I have two different names, two different websites, but I still haven't really split my social media. And as you're speaking, I'm like, and I've been thinking I really need to sort out JF Penn as a separate entity in social media, and I have a different Facebook page, but it's so important when it comes to this, because you have, as soon as you Google someone and you land on a page, you make a decision quite quickly, don't you, as to whether or not you want to talk to them.
Yeah, definitely. And I have this conversation with my clients all the time about specialising, and people are so scared of specialising, and they're so scared to be pigeonholed, and they say, I don't want people to pigeonhole me. But actually, journalists in particular, they're really busy people, and they're just looking for that go-to person. So, they're not interested in the fact that, you're a thriller writer, but you've also written non-fiction about surfing or whatever. You need to find a way that basically you can make yourself the go-to person that comes up in search for whatever it is that is most important to you to get out there. So sometimes it means making a few decisions about what you're going to prioritize, and it might be that you prioritize different things at different times. It might be that you're trying to push a non-fiction book for a while, so you change some of your profiles to reflect that. And when you're back in the fiction writing, because I know that lots of your audience kind of do both, then you're back in the fiction, you might change things around. So it's just about kind of just always asking yourself that question, if a journalist was looking for somebody to help with this, would they be able to find me? And, what do I need to change so that they can find me more easily?
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to cover that first is because I know most people hate pitching, but you can avoid pitching by making yourself findable, which is fantastic. But now let's talk about pitching. So basically, and I'm sorry for anyone listening who still feels this way, but nobody cares that you have a book, right? Nobody actually cares. And in fact, when you're a journalist, everyone has a blooming book. Seriously, you get pitched every day, right? People with books. So how can an author who wants to get PR come up with a story that a journalist would even be interested in? Because so many people pay for these press release things that just go out and say, here's my book, which is pointless. So what is the angle to come up with?
Okay, well, there's lots of different things that you can do. So what I always advise people to do is look around the edges, because I often work with business owners, so I say look around the edges of your business. So in the case of authors, I'd say look around the edges of your book and your writing. So look at the areas of your life which intersect with your book and your writing, and that's often where the stories are. So when I'm working with people, I have this kind of like handout that I use with them, and I can share it actually with your audience if you think they find it useful. And basically it's got, like, in the middle it's got your brand or your book or your product or whatever it is, and then around the side it's got work, relationships and friendships, life and death, money, and it's got all these kind of areas of your life which intersect with your business. And that's basically what journalists are far more interested in, is those areas. And often, so I'll come back to that in a second, but the other thing is often that we all have, I say in business that people have a business story, but I think people often have a book story as well. So they have a story behind why they write what they write. And you've got some great stories around what you do, leaving your job and going minimalist and moving to another part of the country so that you could work solely as a, and being unhappy in your job. And I heard you talking on another podcast about getting divorced in your 20s. My journalist brain clocked that as well, because I was like, so all those things that have happened in your life are often, and how they relate to your book, are often far more interesting to journalists. So I get really clear on kind of what your book story is. And to give you a few examples, so I'm always quite interested to see authors how they PR their books. But the Adele Parks, who is quite a popular chick lit author, what I've noticed about her when she has a new book out, she always appears in the Daily Mail with some story from her life which links to the theme of her book. So I've seen her write stuff about how she was proposed to 8 times, and that particular, I think it was 8 times, it was a lot, and related to the theme of her, the theme of her current book. And it was, and it was basically a nice read. It was a great story, and had nothing to do with her book on the face of it. But at the end, it just had Adele Parks' new book is out and blah, blah, blah. And when you thought about the theme, they were quite linked. She had another one, I think, about why she has only got one child and why she chose not to do that. I think I saw that in The Guardian, I think it was. I've also seen her, what else have I seen her do? It's the proposal one. Her best friend divorcing her. I saw a piece that she'd written about that, and that kind of linked to the theme of her book. And that's what journalists are interested in. They're interested in the human story. So it's basically trying to find, I mean, that's one way. There's other things that I can mention as well, but for fiction authors, I think it works particularly well. That can work really well. And also, you know, I was listening to a podcast episode with Claire McIntosh, who's just launched, she hasn't just launched actually, but she's got that really kind of amazing thriller, and she's doing really, really, really well. And I know that her story is she lost a child, and I heard her talking on a podcast about how losing that child kind of inspired her to become an author and inspired some of the themes in her book. And I think when you're a fiction writer, the things that you end up writing about, I think I haven't published any fiction, but from my, you know, from working with writers and interviewing lots of writers, I think often the that come up in their fiction often do link to their lives. So they've often got stories, you know, things that have happened to them in lives which come out in different ways in their book. So it's about kind of finding those stories that journalists will be interested in, and then you go to them and say, look, you know, I've got you know, this really strong personal story, would you be interested in doing this? And by the way, I've also got a book out. So it's almost like you turn it upside down and you go with the story, and then they, you know, if you can sell them a really, you know, compelling story, then they will be, you know, normally happy to give a plug for your book at the end. And if you look at, in the UK, we have the Guardian, which is obviously one of our biggest selling newspapers, and also internationally online, and they have a family section on a Saturday. And what I've noticed about that section is often they have a really compelling personal story, you know, around a kind of family issue, you know, maybe long lost relatives, or they have, I don't know, in 40s or something like that, you know, somebody who's had a child in each decade, something like that. And then when you look at the end, they've usually got some kind of book out. So it is about finding those personal stories and hooking editors in with those, and that will get you the plug for your book. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, now I'm thinking, oh, how can I tie in, you know, sort of murders and explosions and all that type of thing. And I guess, yeah, it is about really sitting down and thinking about those human issues. And at the end of the day, writing fiction, people are interested in people. And so that's why character is so important when you write fiction. The plot is kind of secondary, the character's first. So what you're basically saying is you as an author have to be a character in the story that the PR person is interested in. And I think that's quite hard for a lot of people, you know, myself included. You don't necessarily want that attention on you personally. You'd rather have the attention on your book, but like we just said, nobody cares. And so hopefully that will give people some good ideas. Now, okay, so say they come up with some ideas, how do they know who to pitch? Because I think this is such an important part, isn't it? How do they, because you can't just, there's no point in just sending your story just randomly to a paper or a TV show. So how do you find the right people for your story? Okay,
well, there's a process that I take my clients through. So the first thing I would do is say, well, who is it you want to get in front of? So basically, you know, if you're romantic fiction, or you've got a non-fiction book about, you know, getting PR for your business or your book or whatever, then who is it you need to get in front of? Who do you know? What is your objective? And usually it's to sell books. So you know, where are the potential readers of your book? You know, what are they reading, watching, and listening to, and all the rest of it. So you really need to get clear about what is it you're trying to do, and who you need to get in front of to make that happen. Because I see people who chase coverage in big publications, you know, I must get in the New York Times, or I want to be in the Sydney Morning Herald or whatever, but actually, will that get you in front of the people that you want to read your book? And particularly if you've written like a niche non-fiction title, it might not be the best place for you to be. You know, it might be better for you to be in some kind of industry title that people haven't heard of. So that would be the first step, is like, you know, what is your objective? Presumably in most cases with books it is to sell more books. So who do you need to get in front of to sell those books, and what do they read, watch and listen to? And people often say to me at that point, well, how do I find out? Well, you know, just ask people. So find, you know, 5, 10 15 people who are your, ideal readers, and just ask them. And just bear in mind that people don't always tell you the truth. So, like, for example, everybody says in the UK they don't read the Daily Mail, and most people do, and they love it. But they will tell you that they read all these highbrow things.
Yeah. That's like people reading, saying they've read literary fiction, but actually they're reading romance on their Kindle.
Exactly, yeah. And so just bear in mind, you have to have a sort of, take it with a slight pinch of salt, but you will get a sort of general sense of what people are reading, what they engage with, and there really is your, where you need to go. So when I was publishing my book recently, my non-fiction book on how to get press coverage, like a DIY book, how to get press coverage, I knew there was no way that the Nationals were going to be interested in that, or not in the sense, or not in not in just writing about it. I just knew it wouldn't be of interest. So I did several things. So I wrote this opinion piece for PR Week about why, or pitched this opinion piece about why all people who work in the PR industry should spend some time in a newsroom. And, that's a kind of quite a sort of controversial. I wrote a kind of very practical how-to piece for The Guardian on how to get press coverage, or some kind of aspect of it. So once you kind of really kind of thought where you need to be and who you need to get in front of, then the idea starts to roll, and then you can actually go beyond that personal story, because you've then got, it might be that there's some themes in your book, or there's something that you know about, you're expert in, that would lend itself really well to an opinion article like the one that I mentioned. Or it may well be, and this is another thing I encourage people to do, is the things that you could teach people. So, for example, actually, I had an author who posted in my Facebook group earlier on, who was saying that she'd got some publicity in a writing magazine, I think, for one of her books that had come out, and she was teaching something. It was something around the sort of self-publishing process or something like that. So once you kind of, it really is about kind of identifying where you need to be and what those publications are, then really, really researching them and saying not what is the story I want to tell, because the story we all want to tell is how brilliant we are and how brilliant our book is. But instead of that, is like, what is the story people actually want to hear? And like I said at the beginning, that will differ depending on the kind of publications that you've identified. So if you've got a short list of, you think, well, my readers, potential readers, they read The Guardian, the Huffington Post, the, I don't know, Cosmopolitan magazine, then it really is about rolling your sleeves up, and, as one of my colleagues used to say, newspaper colleagues, just getting your fingers grubby and actually sitting down with those publications, or looking at them online, and actually looking at what kind of content do they actually run, not what would I like them to run, what do they actually run. And then you start to think, oh, look, well, that's interesting, because they have a very powerful first-person story every Saturday. I wonder if, that story about the time I nearly died could work. I'm being very flippant here, but, it really is about, like, fitting. I sometimes think it's like one of those children's shape-sorted toys, when you put the square peg in the square bit and the round bit. It's a bit like that. So once you start to look at publications like that, and you start to think, okay, well, they have that regular bit there, and maybe that thing that happened to me there. Oh, and, in that they have sort of, really practical stuff, about fly fishing, and I could suggest an article, 6 bits of tackle you need, or whatever. I'm being very, but it's about really sort of looking at what they cover and where you can fit in, which is a very different place than most people. Most people come at it like from a kind of like me, and then just
pitching what they have. So funny when you said how you almost died. I did almost die in Bali. I had a wheatgrass shot, and it turns out I'm allergic to, and I almost died of a wheatgrass shot at a yoga retreat in Bali, which has got to be a super story. I mean, I've got to use that. So now I'm going to find somewhere to pitch that one.
No, definitely.
And it's funny because it's got nothing to do with my books. But what you're saying is that doesn't matter. At the end, it can. You just want people to think, oh, that's interesting. And then they'll see at the end that you have a book, right?
Yes, exactly. And also, I always encourage people to try. If there's a way that you can try and mould what you do into it. So, for example, one of my clients, when I started working with him, he was a coach, actually. He was a relationship coach. And I said to him, what inspired you to do what you do? Why do you work with couples? And he said, well, because my parents have been really unhappily married for the whole of their life, and they've just got divorced in their 80s. And I was like, oh my God, I really want to read that story. But, it wasn't just about that being a great story that I wanted to read. And incidentally, that piece appeared in The Guardian and also in the Daily Mail's You magazine as well. But it was like, it really was relevant to his work that he was doing, because it made him want to work with couples and help them save their marriages. And so often there's usually a way that you can make it relevant to what you do. Like it's
Yeah.
so I'm sure there probably will be a way that you could at least mention in there that you were a writer or something.
Yeah, I was on
But
writing retreat, but
yes.
just come. So taking that further, so people have found that they could pitch this particular thing. Do they then find the name of the journalist, and then they try and get the journalist's contact details and target like one or two specific people rather than just scattergun?
Yes, so this is where some people go wrong. They just kind of think, oh, okay, I found this magazine, let's just send it to the editor. And actually, in reality, the editor of a magazine or newspaper probably doesn't do so much of the data commissioning, we call it. So you'll probably find that there will be, then it's kind of like you find the section editor that you want. So, for example, I just mentioned that was the family section of The Guardian. So Graham had sort of realised that there was a section that carried that kind of content. So he's like, right, now I need to find out the name of the... Well, I told him because I knew. But, if to try and find out the name of that particular person, and then you really need to get it in front of the person who can make a decision. And it's a bit like when you're pitching a book proposal or something. You don't want to just send it. If you're trying to get a particular agent to work with you send it to that person. You don't just send it generically and hope that it will land on the right person's desk. You need to find the person. Twitter is brilliant for finding journalists contact, for finding journalists. And the other thing I would recommend that people do, so say for example you've decided, that you've got a hit list and, I don't know, it's the New York Times or whatever, and there's a particular section you'd really love to get in, then find out who their editor is and basically kind of stalk them on Twitter for a while and just have a look at what they're sharing, what they're talking about. Maybe you could just start replying to a few tweets or whatever and just kind of warm them up a little bit. And that can be one way so that when your pitch does land, it's not entirely cold. I mean, you have to kind of, make sure you're not being too stalkery or whatever, but that can, and it's all out there, Twitter, LinkedIn, and sometimes you can buy lists of journalists' email addresses, but I just think it's a bit of a waste of money, because I think you can find most people you need to connect with within about 3 or 4 clicks. So why would you spend money on lists that are probably out of date? Sometimes you'll find the right person and then you'll get an out of office that says they're on maternity leave or something like that. And so if you want to get, and I'll just pick up the phone. That's what I often say to people. So just pick up the phone and just ask, and you might get passed around a little bit, and you might get people who are a bit short with you because newspapers in particular are quite busy places. But who cares? That's the worst that could happen. And you've got the name of the person you want to get it in front of, and that really often is half the battle. When I see people not getting responses and getting despondent, it's often because they're sending it to the wrong person, or they're making the cardinal sin of sending it to something like, if you rang up The Guardian and said, I've got a feature idea, they'd probably tell you to send it to features@theguardian.com.
Yeah, and it would just go in a spam box somewhere.
Exactly, yeah. So, it really is about trying to find that person and make a relationship. And, like with, I run events in London every month where I get just to come talk about what they're looking for, and just finding out where journalists seeking out to meet them, and if there's somebody that you'd really like to start engaging with, or you'd like to write for them, then find out where they're speaking. They're often speaking at events, or they might be at trade shows, or whatever it might be. It's like anything else that you're doing in your marketing and PR, you just got to hustle a bit.
Yes, and I know people listening have got excited, and then you started saying things like make a phone call and
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, because, well, for me, as I'm an introvert and I hate phone calls. Like, it's probably my number one issue. I never answer the phone. I just don't like phone calls. And one of the reasons I do podcasting is actually so I still have to call someone, and it still gives me sweaty palms. I've been doing this for years. And so for me, that's the big issue with PR, is this follow-up, because everyone says, oh, even if you email, you should follow up again, you should like you just said, pick up the phone or something. Now, I'm fine if the contact has been made, if there's been a warm-up, but this sort of cold phone calls is my utter nightmare. And also in terms of time, I guess. But let's just stick with the introvert thing. Do you have any tips, I guess, for people who struggle with this following up and reaching out?
Well, the good news is that you probably won't have to phone. because most journalists hate getting phone calls too, so it's fine. But if you had a story that was really timely, so say for example, so you said you would almost died after drinking, was it wheatgrass or something?
Yeah, wheatgrass shot. Yeah.
So let's just say that after we got off this call, you went onto the BBC website and you saw that a tourist, was in trouble or was dying or something. It sounds terrible, doesn't it? Like I'm being flippant, but this is kind of how reporters think. And you saw that, or maybe a gang of school children, or a drunks and wheatgrass, and they were all desperately ill. I would say to you, you need to get on the phone and make yourself known, and jump on it. So in that kind of situation, when it's a really hot story and you're the only person that can help, definitely just get on the phone. But most of the time journalists don't answer their phone either, and they're not interested, so they operate an email. So I would say, first of all, don't too much about it. And if it's like getting contact details, so that's the kind of thing you get, or an assistant, to ring up someone who doesn't mind ringing up, and if you don't like doing it. So I wouldn't. I've actually written a blog post which is actually how to do PR if you're an introvert, which if you want to link to, you can do, because it's such a problem. So you might find that useful. And I think the chasing up thing is you can usually do most of it by email. And if you do have to get on the phone, just a few key things. So I was covering for an editor at The Guardian the last few weeks. So I always pick up the phone, because obviously I have a business where I teach people how to get in the media, and I want to understand, what people are finding hard or what they're making mistakes with. So I'm like, I'm going to answer the phone. So I was picking up the phone, and the first mistake people do is they immediately, if you imagine you're a journalist, and your audience will know this. So you're writing, you're deep in thought, you're just thinking about how you're going to get from A to B in your writing. The phone goes, you pick it up, and there's somebody who is just babbling on at you, and you don't actually understand what they're saying, because you're like, I was just doing something else, and now you're talking at me. And so when people say journalists can be a bit rude, often that they're literally just, they've had their head in something else, and then you phone, and people get so nervous they just vomit over them. So I've had that thing where I've picked up the phone and people are just like talking at me. They haven't asked me if I've got time to talk. They haven't. So if you do have to phone, I would just ring up and say something like, it's Joanna here. I'm the author of whatever book it is, and I just wondered if you had time to talk through a story idea. And so basically you're giving them a bait that you've actually got something useful for them. You've got a story idea, and that will show what you're talking about. And some people say, oh, don't ask, because then they'll probably say no. Lots of journalists do say, I haven't got any time. But actually, if someone said that to me, I would probably go, I've only got a minute, but go on. And then and if you can just get your idea in the first in the first bit, that you don't ramble or waffle. And by asking if they've got time to talk, it also slows you down as well, because you say, have you got a minute?
Take a breath.
And it actually forces you to say, and then just sort of saying, instead of kind of rambling on about who you are and your background, just saying, I noticed a story about the tourists who wheatgrass, and are really poorly. That happened to me last year. I just, if you're doing anything on it, that really is your pitch. You don't need to do anything more than that. And I don't need to be polished or have a script or anything like that. It's just being able to get to the point quickly. I think that's the bit that journalists, and just treat it like a conversation. I think often people have this idea of journalists they're in the kind of office, and they're kind of like swanning around like these powerful people saying yes or no. But actually it can be quite scary when you're an editor, because you've got pages to fill, or you've been told you've got to commission, if it's online, you've got to commission so many stories, or, on radio and TV, you've got airspace to fill. And sometimes you just can't find that story. And I've literally been, close to tears, because I know my editor's coming back from holiday and has told me I have to have a story on whatever, and I just can't find anything. And so just telling yourself that you're not a pest, you're actually potentially solving a problem, so you're potentially, helping them to get home early. Well, you are, every email that you send, every phone call you make, you're potentially solving a problem, helping them go home earlier, fill some space, get their boss off the back or whatever. And I think often people approach this sort of thing feeling like they're a pest and they're being annoying, but actually I could just hug, people send you'll notice if any of your listeners have ever done any of PR, pitching into the media, you'll notice something about journalists, that they'll ignore you, but the minute they want something, they'll be on the phone, and phoning you every 5 seconds, oh, have you got this yet? Or can we have that photo, or whatever. And so I think just remembering that you could potentially be solving a problem, and helping them out is a much better way to think of it than this kind of scary pitching thing.
Wow, I could talk to you all day, but we are pretty much out of time. So tell everybody about your book. Your press release is breaking my heart. What else can they find in there?
So my book, as the title would suggest, was inspired by the fact that as a journalist, I've spent 15 years working as a national journalist and just seeing so many dreadful press releases come into my inbox. So it's really, the subtitle is An Unconventional Way to Tell Your Story in the Media, a totally unconventional way. So basically I take people through everything they need to know to do coverage. So I start right at the beginning with what I call the low-hanging fruits, the stuff that you can do that doesn't involve pitching, that involve press releases or phoning anyone up. So I teach you some really simple stuff that everybody can do just online, and then we progress to how to find story ideas, how to put a pitch together, how to chase up a journalist, and what to do if you haven't heard back. And I've also got some other sort of bonus bits in there about getting speaking gigs and other things like that. And I've also created some resources as well. So for each chapter, there's a downloadable resource that you can go. I use Teachable to host it. You can go over and download that. So yeah, it's basically everything you need to know to get started with your own PR. And I've been doing it's from my point of view as a journalist, and all the things that I've learned dealing with people pitching and hearing their pitches over the phone and seeing their press releases, and so you couldn't get more sort of genuine in terms of and I genuinely want to help people, because I've been a small business owner myself for years, and the book really was inspired by often seeing small business owners or authors or consultants or people who maybe didn't have a massive budget spending out on PR companies, and thinking, no, you could be doing it yourself and you could be doing a much better job. So that's
Brilliant.
it in a nutshell.
No, fantastic. So where can people find you and your book and your blog and your podcast online?
So I'm at janetmurray.co.uk. My podcast is the Soulful PR Podcast, and online I generally hang out most on Twitter, which is at @Jan_Murray. But I've also got a really fabulous Facebook group called the Soulful PR Facebook Community. I've got a couple of thousand people in there who are in there every day sharing ideas and tips and contacts, and that's really a great place to start.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Janet. That was amazing.
Thank you.